Hey YouTube, Joelboy here. So today I want to talk about the Void Century. This is a theory that I've already covered in the past in a text-only video, one of the first 6 or so videos that I made when I had less than 20 subscribers. But now there's over 8,000 of you guys, and I believe the majority of you are subscribed to me for voice theories, not text theories. I know it kind of differs between each person, which kind that they prefer, and so I think it's about time to at least do a voice version of this theory, and now is the perfect time for me to cover it because this will be extremely relevant to a theory that I'll be doing here in a couple days. But without further ado, let's talk about what potentially caused the conflict between the Ancient Kingdom and the world government, which were at that time known as the 20 Kings, during what became known as the Blank Century. So firstly, let me emphasize that this conflict that occurred during the Void Century between these two powerhouse groups did not occur out of randomness. There was a reason behind this conflict. Whatever that reason might be, this was the impetus which inspired a nearly century-long war between these two groups. And so just like real wars in the real world, there was ideals behind which each of these groups stood for. That they each supported different notions, and that this was the reason behind the conflict. And so the 20 kings were fighting for something that they actually believed in, the same with the Ancient Kingdom, and ultimately the victor decides the rules going forward in the future. History is written by the victors, and the victors decide ultimately what is good and what is bad. And so in the story of One Piece, the history and what's revealed to the people of the world is that the world government fought the evil entity, the Ancient Kingdom, who used the world-destroying weapons, the ancient weapons, and that because of these ancient weapons' existence, that is the reason why they have outlawed studying the poneglyphs and learning of the true history. They reason that if somebody learns of the true history, they could possibly reawaken these weapons, which will ultimately destroy the world. And so for that reason, they've justified the destruction of the history itself. But Clover doesn't think this is true. He doesn't think it's the ancient weapons which the world government truly fears. It's the actual ideals that the Ancient Kingdom stood for. And I think this was even emphasized within the actual chapter itself, which is that when Clover gets to revealing the name of this Ancient Kingdom, at this point in time, the world government decided to kill him. And so I really wonder to myself, why is this name so dangerous? So the question to me really is, what was the center of this conflict that occurred during the Void Century? What did the Ancient Kingdom stand for, and what did the 20 Kings stand for? And so I want to make this blatantly clear. This does not have to be just one reason. They didn't have to just be fighting over one particular ideal and difference in belief. It could have been a lot of things. But in the story of One Piece and all the possible reasons why they could have potentially been enemies, there's one reason which really sticks out to me more so than any other reason and has the most supporting evidence as far as I'm aware. And this ideal is slavery. One thing that has been made clear in One Piece is that the Celestial Dragons support slavery. And although the world government made slavery illegal 200 years in the past, there's still keep in mind that the world government was created 800 years ago, a 600-year period in which slavery was allowed in the world of One Piece. But when I say there was 600 years in which slavery was allowed in the world of One Piece, I mean that it's actually still allowed today depending on who you are. The Celestial Dragons can do whatever they want to do, and the world government and the Marines basically ignore the actions of the Celestial Dragons and the slavery that they partake in, despite the fact that it was made illegal. And we even have direct evidence that one of the 20 kings, the founders of the world government, the Don Quixote family, definitely supported slavery, because it's the Tontata revealed that 1,000 years ago the Don Quixote family in Dressrosa initiated the Tontata's quote-unquote era of slavery. So it's very clear that the Celestial Dragons support slavery, and that their ancestors supported slavery, which then potentially offers up a reason for them to have clashed with the Ancient Kingdom in the past if the Ancient Kingdom did not support slavery. And so, did the ancient kingdom support slavery or not? Is there any evidence that really supports or contradicts this? And to be honest with you, there's really no evidence out there that the ancient kingdom was specifically against slavery whatsoever. But what we do have is specific evidence that the ancient kingdom was friends with these non-human groups that are specifically targeted above any other for slavery. While the founders of the world government were busy calling these fishmen specifically fish, that they weren't even sentient beings, and even going so far as to call them livestock, the ancient kingdom seemed to be really good friends with all of these non-human groups. The evidence that really supports this is given from the poneglyphs and their locations. We haven't seen very many poneglyphs yet in One Piece, but so far there's 2 poneglyphs currently located and protected by territories of non-humans. This being the poneglyph that we see Letter of Apology to Poseidon from Joy Boy in Fishman Island, as well as the red poneglyph, the road poneglyph, located in Zou under the protection of the Minks. But going back to Poseidon for a moment, it can't be overstated that Poseidon is a mermaid princess, or a mermaid queen, and she was the ancient weapon of the ancient kingdom. And right there we can already say that the fishmen and the ancient kingdom were friends. And so given this context that the world government or the 20 kings supported slavery and specifically seek out slaves such as mermaids, which St. Charlos wanted to spend 500 million berries, 500 million berries to acquire a mermaid, you can see sort of the roots of conflict potentially brewing. And the last bit of evidence that we have is that the Minks have been on the back of Zunisha, living on Zou for 1,000 years, which slightly predates the Void Century. And so going back to the dwarves, and that the Don Quixote family initiated their era of slavery 1,000 years ago, one must start to wonder, why did the Minks resort to living on the back of a giant elephant 1,000 years ago? Was it potentially so that they could avoid the humans and that all the conflict that was going on between these humans and the non-humans? I'm really starting to think that about 1,000 years ago was when the problems initially really began to become problems for the non-humans and the humans. This conflict really started to grow. And so then it would make sense that shortly after this time period, a group that was in support of these non-humans would then start to take action against these 20 kings that were persecuting and discriminating the non-humans. So with all this information being in place, I think that we should really be thinking that the conflict in the Void Century was at least in part, if not entirely, started because of this relationship between the 20 kings and their desire to discriminate, potentially even eliminate, the non-humans from the One Piece world. And I don't think it's any coincidence since we've gotten to the New World, Oda has really been hammering this home for us, that the ancient kingdom was friends with the non-humans, and that the world government and that the world in general oppresses these non-humans. We start off in the New World at Fishman Island, and that entire arc is centered around the hatred between the humans and the fishmen. Then we leave that island, and then we go to Dressrosa, where we find out that the Don Quixote family had in the past initiated the Tontadas era of slavery. Then we travel to the Minks, who have been harbored on the back of a giant elephant for 1,000 years, potentially so that they could remove themselves from the oppression that they face at the hands of the humans. And then after that we head to Whole Cake Island and Totland, where Big Mom's dream seems to be the protection of all of these groups from this oppression that exists within the world. Each and every single one of these arcs has something which adds to this potential controversy. And we can't forget this as well. Luffy's dream is to be the freest man on the sea, and in general protect his own freedom and the freedom of everybody else, not only his friends, but even those that he doesn't even know. Freedom is everything to Luffy, and slavery in and of itself takes away people's freedom and is something that Luffy is going to inherently be against, and is basically the reason why he took on the world government and punched the Celestial Dragon smack in the face in order to protect his strongest ideal, that of freedom. And with all this being said, do you think that it's any coincidence that there's clues and hints out there that the family of D, which Monkey D. Luffy is a part of, is in some way descended from the ancient kingdom? The inherited will is a real thing in One Piece, And so, by no stretch of the imagination, is it a stretch to say that the ancient kingdom stood against slavery, and specifically the discrimination and slavery of the non-humans, but also just in general, against the 20 kings which sought to oppress people in the world. So now let's go on to a related but different topic, which is that the world government and the celestial dragons are for slavery. But the question is then why 200 years ago did they decide to make slavery illegal? Obviously they didn't make it illegal for themselves, the celestial dragons, but still they made it illegal across the world. What was the real motivation that inspired them to do this? One question that comes to mind is that did they potentially think that these races that they were enslaving, or these people that they were enslaving, would one day rebel against them because of this? And this is definitely a possibility. We can see in that areas outside of the world government's control is specifically a place where people who have had bad experiences with the celestial dragon go to leave the world government's influence. And the Don Quixote family, after they left the celestial dragons, ended up going there to one of these territories, and they faced the wrath and the consequences of both their and their ancestors' actions. But to add a twist into this, there's actually only one bit of evidence in One Piece that really goes against the idea that slavery is going to be a huge topic and potentially a reason between the conflict of the ancient kingdom and the celestial dragons. This goes back to the celestial dragon who ended up visiting Fishman Island. This celestial dragon, who called the fishmen fish, also called them livestock, basically was wondering what happened to all of the fisherman's slaves that he had. He wanted to get them back after they were saved by Fisher Tiger. And so what ended up happening was that in order to retrieve them, he decided to go himself to Fishman Island to retrieve his former slaves. And so as he was traveling to Fishman Island, they encountered some issues, they ran into some sea kings, and pretty much everyone on the ship died except for the world noble. And so he ended up washing ashore on Fishman Island, and many of the former slaves, after seeing him there, wanted to kill him. And then he himself demanded that the slaves be returned to him, and basically for them to save him. And so long story short, Otohime ends up saving this person and then accompanying him up into the surface. And then she returns later with a note of approval from the celestial dragons that if they get enough signatures, the fishmen would be able to live on the surface without any consequences. And so I asked myself, why would he do this? We're assuming that this is the same celestial dragon that views fishmen as fish and livestock, and that their stench literally disturbs him. And that despite the fact that they saved him, he said that he would enact his revenge on them once he ends up going back to Marijoa. And then somehow Otohime accompanies him and then comes back with a letter of approval saying that the world nobles support the idea that the fishmen will live on the surface. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so when thinking about this, I came to an interesting theory. Maybe the celestial dragon that accompanied Otohime really has no intention of doing any good to the fishmen and Fishman Island. Perhaps this letter, which offers the world noble support for the fishmen to return to land, is just a very clever plan, perhaps, of getting all the fishmen up into the surface to round them out for a quick genocide. Fishman Island is not an easily accessible island. The celestial dragon found that out himself as he tried to travel down there and had his ship completely destroyed and all the members of his crew die. And so it's not an easy proposition to try and take out Fishman Island or capture all of its people as they sit at the bottom of the ocean 10,000 meters down. And so it would be a lot easier. The Marines could use their entire forces to subdue the entire Fishman population if they were to perhaps be convinced that it's safe for them to live on the land right now. But I can promise you, right now, it isn't safe. And so I think this theory would make the fishmen that are attending the Reverie, King Neptune, Shirahoshi, and that group, that plot, what's going to happen there, a lot more interesting. Maybe they're just being lured to the surface, and this isn't a hand or an olive branch being extended to this race. But yeah, guys, I've rambled on long enough here. I think there is substantial evidence that suggests that slavery and discrimination is a huge theme in one piece, and specifically a huge reason behind the entire conflict within the story, specifically the conflict that occurred during the Void Century. And then going forward in the story, I think that this conflict isn't yet done, and that we will find even more reasons to come to understand that this is a problem that needs solving within the world, and this could be as soon as the Reverie. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you agree or if you disagree, if you have any more evidence to add to this topic, or whatever. Just add your thoughts in the comment section. I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. We're now over 8,000 people. That's just so crazy to me. And yeah, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this, and have a nice day.